Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasts.
Hello, my name is Kayla. I am the host of Tragedy with a View, and today I have Kai, who hosts Love and Murder with me. Would you like to
Hi.
say
Hi, everybody.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I don't normally do guest hosting. I guess it's something I need to get into. But when I heard about your podcast and you wanted to have someone on, I was like, oh, this sounds great.
Yeah, and for listeners, we're both, I guess, members of the
Darkcast Network.
Yep. So do you want to talk real quick about your podcast in case anybody's interested in going over and giving that a listen?
Sure. So my podcast is called Love and Murder, Heartbreak to Homicide. I tell true crime stories about people who were hurt by the people closest to them, cases where love, trust, and family ties usually end in betrayal or murder. And I know y'all are saying, ugh, not another true crime podcast. But I do tell my stories focusing on the victims and their families, not just the crime itself. So my podcast isn't about like shock value or anything. It's about mainly giving a voice to the people who can't tell their story anymore. And so with that in mind, being that I do it from, thinking about the victims and their families and the people they left behind, in my podcast, you're going to hear my raw reactions. You're going to hear me ranting. You're going to hear me raving. You're going to hear my honest frustrations. There was actually one podcast I was crying in, like bawling like a baby because the justice system and the perps did this baby so wrong, and I couldn't hold it back. So that's kind of what my podcast is like. So even if true crime isn't your usual thing, these are human stories about trust, betrayal, and what happens when relationships go too far. I do hear people reaching out to me and saying that I don't normally listen to true crime, but I listen to you. I've had the victims' families reach out to me, thanking me for my podcast. So it's not just a true crime podcast. This is a voice of the victims. And you can check me out at murderandlove.com. That's love and murder backwards, murderandlove.com.
That's awesome. I have done a few true crime episodes, and I don't try to stay away from true crime, but it's like if I get too much into true crime, it starts to mess with my head a little bit. And I love that, stepping away from, the person who actually did it, because that's what a lot of people focus on is like, oh, they grew up doing this and they grew up doing that. And all of these things were little signs that they might have, commit a crime someday. And then they did. And this is what, and it's like so focused on the person who did the things that it's like, but what about the person who's no longer here, and how does that affect everything? And so I love that.
Right. I mean, I talk about the person who did the crime. I talk about their background. I talk about the victim's background and then how they intersected. So it comes together like a story, and then it lets you know what happened. But there's sometimes like in the crime, they'll be like, oh, well, he was abused when he was 2. And I'm like, okay, so are like 9 billion other people, and they didn't become murderers. And yes. So, that's kind of like how I do the case. Now there are some instances, like I did one case where this guy was schizophrenic. He was totally gone. And they explained it. Well, I've dealt with people with schizophrenia, and I kind of explained it like this guy was sleepwalking, for instance. So, imagine if he woke up and he just realized what he did. But the justice system, like, put him under the jail instead of, I wasn't saying keep him free, but I was saying put him in a psychiatric ward. And they completely did him wrong, even though his wife forgave him because she understood. They did him wrong. They didn't do justice for the baby. So, it just depends. But I look at it from the side of the victims, their families. Let's get justice. What are you people doing? What is going on? So You usually hear me like ranting and raving on my episodes.
Yeah. And, that's actually something that we could probably talk about for forever, because I work in the legal field. My day job is in the legal field. And so the processes are very difficult to work in, and they're difficult to understand. And as you've said, the justice system is not always fair and it's not always just. And like I said, we could talk about it forever.
I don't know how you do it. Like in many of my episodes, I'm like, oh, I couldn't be a police officer because I would have XYZ. Yeah. I couldn't be a judge. I couldn't be a lawyer. I can't understand defense lawyers.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely an aspect there where sometimes it's like, how do you sleep at night? Right. Knowing that everything is showing that this person did it, and you're like, well,
exactly.
It's like, how do you have that moral compass? People don't.
I have put a call out to defense lawyers to come on my show because I want to hear from them. I have not heard anything back, but hey, if anybody is a defense lawyer and wants to come on my show, hit me up, murderandlove.com.
I'll put some feelers out there, see if I know anyone. But we are going to move on to this episode's story. So just as a general disclaimer, as I almost always do in my shows, as we get into this episode, we are going to discuss some graphic injuries, so please be aware and cautious of any little ears that may be around and able to listen along, because we are going to talk about some gross things. Not a super long time about it, but it's there. And like in true crime and murder, the process of hunting is something that I do not understand, and others are also out there who cannot fathom how people can go into the wild and bring home their own food. We're talking about, people who are actually hunting for food rather than trophy hunters, because that's a whole different concept. And I myself will admit that there are times where I don't understand things about hunters, especially when those hunters are going into the wilderness for days at a time, much like how Greg and Roger Matthews set out into the wild of Alaska to hunt for moose. So, very quick disclaimer, Roger Matthews goes by the name Matt, and so that's what we are going to call him for the rest of this episode. And if you're like, why is he called Matt Matthews? It's because he was in the military, and I'm guessing that with his military background, people were calling him Matthews, and then it just got shortened to Matt, and then that's how he went. So we will call him Matt, but his name is actually Roger. Both Greg and Matt are experienced hunters, having gone hunting with their dad as they grew up. And Matt had been living in Alaska for years, allowing him to become accustomed to the experience that only Alaska can provide. Between the two, they had hunt for boar, deer, a variety of birds, moose, caribou, and coyote. Matt and Greg are not trophy hunters. Matt uses the meat he is harvesting in order to stock his freezers and feed his family, and it is a time-consuming and very expensive way to essentially go to the grocery store.
Now, I understand hunting. I actually agree with it. Not saying I'll go hunting. And my husband wants to go hunting. And I always told him, you can go hunting. Now, this is hunting for food. I do not agree with trophy hunting or anything like that.
Same.
I've always said you can go hunting, but please bring it back like you just came from the store or like from the butcher, because I don't want to see any of it. I don't want to see any of it. Because if you bring back an animal and then you start doing that in my yard, I'm going vegan. It's just, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah. I have two very quick hunting stories. One, in high school, my dad and my brother hunt quite a bit for deer, and they would bring home the deer. We would also use it for meat. And one time they got a deer, didn't tell me. They hung it in the barn where my horses were kept. I went out into the barn first thing in the morning to feed the horses.
Not.
And walked into the deer.
Oh my God.
So that was traumatizing. And then the second story is I one time went hunting with my dad, and we were sitting where there was like a creek, and then there was a field and just like a few trees in between the creek and the field. And as we're sitting there, a huge buck went through the creek and across into the field across from us. And he was just running so beautifully and so gracefully. And I was just watching him in awe. And my dad was sitting there with me and he's like, Kayla, that's when you're supposed to shoot.
No,
and I was like,
no, nope, we're not eating tonight. We could get some fish.
this is not for me, clearly.
Yeah, no.
So Greg himself is not only a skilled hunter, but he is extremely smart, and it shows in how many high stress situations that he has taken on as jobs over the years. So he's been a firefighter, or he was a firefighter for over 2 decades. He worked at the World Trade Center for 3 weeks during the 9/11 crisis. He worked as a rescue helicopter pilot and then in Homeland Security for the city of San Diego. In 2015, he was the anti-terrorism officer for the entire Southwest Division of the United States Army Corps of Engineers. So
Wow.
he's high-level work. There's a lot of stress in it. And so it doesn't matter what his job is, though. He always loves his family. So when his brother, Matt, reached out to him about an opportunity, he couldn't say no. They were going bow hunting. They originally planned to include all 3 of their brothers going hunting. So there was Greg, Matt, and Shane. And much like all things in life, it doesn't work out the way they planned. So it ends up just being Greg and Matt. Greg flew.
And they're going bow and arrow?
Correct.
Okay, did they bring, or am I getting too ahead of this story? Because I was going to say, did they bring anything else with them?
Yes, they did. So we will actually cover that here in just a minute. So Greg flew into Alaska from his home in Plano, Texas, and this trip was actually something that they had been dreaming about for their entire lives. Greg was not alone in his high-stress jobs, as Matt also worked in the Air Force, and when the end of his career came, he decided to stay in Alaska, which was where he had been stationed. As they both joined the service and as they grew up and started families and integrated their lives into a career, their longtime dream of moose hunting in Alaska was just put off and then put off again and put off again until Matt retired. Then the spark of that idea ignited once again. They had been making their plans for 2 years, and when you hear this, you might think that that's a really long time to plan for a hunt. You're not wrong. So they had originally planned for 1 year prior, but Greg had gotten a new job and there was some situations that he couldn't get out of. And so he had to call Matt kind of last minute and say, I'm not going to make it. And so they pushed it off for another year, which allowed them to plan a little bit more.
Plan some more, yeah.
And then in addition to all of the planning and all of the thoughts and all of the lists and all of the things that came with this plan to go out into the wilderness for 10 days and hunt for moose, Greg himself spent $10,000 between gear, trip, and permits. So when I'm talking it's expensive, it's very expensive.
I was going to say, I'll just stick to the grocery store. I'm sorry.
Yeah, same. I don't think I could afford a $10,000 grocery trip. Ever.
Never, ever, never, ever. Not even if I become a millionaire.
No. Nope. There's way better things I can spend my money on. So because of his background, Greg was responsible for making sure that they had the appropriate list of things that they would need. The short version of this list includes first aid kits, chainsaws, a grill, sleeping bags and cots, tents, fire starters, GPS, and the list could go on and on and on. Because they were going out into the wilderness for 10 days, they did plan to bring a rifle for each of them in case they came upon a bear or a wolf, both of which are frequent in Alaska. And actually, Greg kind of last minute decided to buy a bear tag as well because he was kind of thinking, just in case we don't find a moose, maybe we'll find a bear and I can shoot a bear and at least provide some food that way. When it came time for them to go, they loaded up Matt's 24-foot jet boat and set out into the wilderness. But when they got to their original planned destination, they found that the water levels were too low for them to go out in, and so they shifted their plan and set off into the Kenai wilderness. For almost 100 years, the Kenai Peninsula has attracted hunters of moose, Dall sheep, and other wild game. In 1941, President Roosevelt designated more than 1.7 million acres as the Kenai National Moose Range. Since then, the Moose Range was expanded and renamed the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge. The Kenai Wilderness makes up well over half of the refuge. The area comprises of slopes of the Kenai Mountains with their ancient glaciers raising from sea level. These glaciers feed 9 river systems that spread all the way down into the lower 48 states, and the spruce birch lowland forest that extends to the shores of the Cook Inlet. Unlike most of Alaska's wildlands, Kenai lies near Anchorage and draws scores of humans visiting its scenic grandeur. More than 200 miles of established trails has given access to much of the backcountry. There's hundreds of splendid small lakes that are accessible through a system of canoe trails, including the popular Swanson River Canoe Trail. Fishing brings many people to the area, including those who fly into the more remote lakes. Motorized boats are allowed on the larger lakes, but are not on the canoe trails. So they kind of keep motorized boats and paddle boats separate. Kenai produces an abundant crop of wild berries, which attracts brown bears, which are relatively scarce when you look at the big picture of things. So there's definitely areas where you're going to find a more bear-dense population in the area, and then there's other areas where you could be there for days and never see a sign of a bear.
But they were kind of planning on possibly seeing a bear because that was their backup plan.
Yes. And then on top of that, moose are actually a food source for bear. So they kind of assumed that since they were looking for moose, they would probably also see
bears. Gotcha.
So they also have to consider, though, wolves, as their howls often break the night stillness. And of course, when you're in this area, insects are insane. Because there are no roads, permanent structures within its boundaries, access is limited to foot, paddle, aircraft, or boats, making a journey into the heart of the wilderness a true backcountry experience. Heading into this area, Greg and Matt knew that they were in for a trip of a lifetime. They drove until they literally ran out of road and then backed up the boat to the water before venturing another 14 miles into the waterway until they found a good spot to use as their camp headquarters on Caribou Island, which is in Skilak Lake. Here they set up camp so they would have a place to house their sleeping bags and cots along with their other gear, and it was all covered so that way it wouldn't get wet. And then they also set up about 75 feet away from them a food storage and cook area. They then tied 400-pound fishing line all the way around their camp and tied aluminum cans that they filled partially full with BBs. So that way, if something hit the line, it would rattle and it would, one, potentially scare away whatever hit the line, and two, alert them that something was coming into their camp.
That's a good idea.
It is. The very first night they were out there, something actually hit that line and it woke both of them up. And to this day, they still have no idea what it was.
Nope. That's what it's called to me, a nope.
A nope. Their first 3 days, besides this thing waking them up, were uneventful. They did not find many signs of moose, though they saw plenty of other wildlife. They also tried to do some fishing for dinner one night and had no luck with catching any fish either. So they figured at this point they were just biding their time. On September 22nd, they had spent 4 days in the wild, and much like the prior day, they get back in their boat. They head out for about 6 miles to a different location. The boat is covered in a light frost from the morning dew, freezing in the cold morning air. The edges of the lake have the smallest layer of light over the shallows. The mountain range on either side is grand, with white from snow drifting down the slopes, and then the leaves changing color gives this picturesque feeling that if Greg hadn't been there, he wouldn't recognize it was real life. As they navigated around the trees that had fallen, Greg is able to look around the lake and take in the scenery. He sees beavers and creeks cascading down from the mountains, and as they go, he just takes this all in as a breath of fresh air. This is moose territory. Moose love wet, swampy areas, and this is exactly the place they want to be. Now
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that's what moose liked. Okay.
They have actually been known to kind of dive to eat vegetation from the bottom of lakes and whatnot.
Really?
So, yeah, they're just very elusive creatures, though. You have to completely stumble upon one by accident or very purposely find one. And even then, it's questionable. So they find this island that has really swampy ground, and they're like, okay, this is the place we want to be. They find a more rocky, stable beach to pull the boat off at, and here they see both bear and moose scat, or if you're not sure what scat is, it's poop. So they see this, they take a pause, and they're like, is this the spot for us? And they, in the end, decide that it is, because they also brought the bear tag, and now they're seeing signs for both the bear and moose, which they can legally hunt. So before them, they knew that there was a valley that would open up down below. And as they walked about 1.5 miles from the shore, they found telltale signs of moose. There were trees that were scraped clear of bark from about 5 to 8 feet high, where bull moose had rubbed the felt from his antlers. And even better, the felt was still on the ground, indicating that the moose was still in the area. As they settled into their positions about 50 yards apart, they were careful to make sure that they had distance between them and that they would be facing in different directions so that if a shot was fired, they wouldn't accidentally be shooting towards the other person.
Hit each other, right?
Yes. So then they sit, they're quietly waiting and watching for any sign of moose to come through the brush.
I'm Ted.
I'm JJ.
And we're here to tell you about our show, Conspiring to Argue.
I like it.
That is not relevant. What do we do on the show?
Well, on our podcast, what we do is take conspiracy theories, and either Ted or myself will argue about if the conspiracy is real or not.
Yep. And sometimes the conspiracies are silly. Sometimes they're, in the pantheon of the greatest conspiracies of all time. It's a mixed bag.
Sometimes they're about aliens.
So check us out wherever you listen to podcasts.
Sometimes they're about murder.
So Matt has a moose call with him, and I want to quickly touch on the particular call that they were using. The call mimicked the sound of a baby moose in distress. Generally speaking, this call is used to attract predators, but it also works for female moose who are very protective of their calves. Based on the research I found, it states to use with caution because mama moose will become very aggressive as they protect their babies.
So then you have to now think, do I want a bear coming after me or a mother moose coming after me?
Yeah. And I have such conflicting feelings about the use of the call because there's better options, but maybe not for what they were intending. I listened to a couple of interviews with Greg, and he never even touches on why they used the call that they did. So I think it plays a role in what happens.
So before you go on, I have a question. So as somebody who doesn't hunt, why do you have problems with them using that call?
Because they're mimicking the sound of a injured or distressed baby. And in my mind, that is asking for trouble when it comes to predators, because a predator is going to hear that and they're going to think easy meal. It's right that way. And the easy meal are two humans. And it just, in my head, it's more likely to pull in a predator than it is the prey that they're actually seeking. And so we're gonna come to that here in a few minutes, but we're gonna touch on that just a little bit more. But that's a great question. Is like I myself, not being a hunter, I don't know if that's common practice, but in my head, from someone who's completely separate from the situation, it sounds like you're asking for trouble. But again, I don't know.
It really does from either angle. It sounds like you're asking for trouble. Do your listeners leave comments?
Some of them do, but mostly they're like not nice comments. They'll say things like, wow, the audio on this one was really bad. When I'm like, listen, I didn't have any issues with editing this. So,
well, listeners, let's leave some nice positive comments on this one. And if you are a hunter, can you explain to us if you would use this call, and what are the pros and cons to using this kind of call?
Yeah, I think the cons are that you could be followed by an angry mama moose who is just trying to protect her babies. And then the other con is that you could be followed by a predator who wants food. Those are the cons in my mind. So I guess I would want to know like what the benefits are and what the draw is for it. And if I'm completely off base with my line of thinking also, because like I said, I'm not a hunter. I'm just using what makes sense to me in my head. So a little bit more about where specifically they were sitting. There was like this ridge or like rolling hill that was kind of along a valley. And from the edge of one side of that little ridge or roll, Greg sat there and he was able to see where two game trails kind of came together and entered into this valley. And then just on the other, kind of like if you followed the ridge around, on the other side was where Matt was sitting. So they were kind of both on each side of this ridge, trying to just, keep their eyes open for any signs of moose. Mm-hmm. The trails that came together to enter the valley was about 100 feet away from Greg. And one of the trails seemed to be used much more often than the other, though they're not like trails that you would think of if you were to go hiking somewhere. Like they're not dirt trails. They're not cleaned up of roots and rocks and whatnot. And they're very much in the remote wilderness. They're in boggy territory, so it's not easy walking. And Greg finds the spot next to a tree where there's a log that fell. Mm-hmm. And so he's using this log as a seat. And as he's sitting and watching, he's listening to Matt, who's using the call, and he's just sitting there and taking in this area, and that he's very grateful to be able to do this with his brother. And he can hear the wind as it's blowing through the tree canopies, and the leaves are rustling, and the insects and the birds are calling to each other. And for those who love the outdoors, this is very much a little slice of heaven. It takes about 3.5 hours, but suddenly the foliage stirs to the left of Greg. It was something big, and it was right in the area where those two trails came together. Many times, different animals will use other animals' trails, and they've also been known to use like actual people trails through national parks and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So it's just easier travel if you're on something that's already kind of had the way cleared. So he sees something shift in that trail area, and his heart immediately leaps, much as it always does whenever he's on a hunt. Finally, he thinks the moose is here, and as his heart starts to race, he tries to keep his breathing even and his arms steady as he looks down so he can set up his bow, and then quietly pulls back on the string. Bringing his gaze back up to the trail to find the moose, he is shocked at what he sees instead. Standing upright in the trail, nose pointed in the air, as it sweeps its head left to right, is a grizzly bear. The bear is huge, estimating around 600 pounds and 8.5 feet tall. The bear, for size reference, Greg said that the bear's head was the size of a 5-gallon bucket. So the way this bear is behaving instantly told Greg that it was trying to follow a scent or maybe a noise, like the noise of a distressed baby moose. And just behind this bear that's standing upright are 2 subadult bears. So
no.
Mama and her 2 cubs.
No, I didn't even consider that. We're thinking about mama moose or a predator. You have all of it wrapped up in one now.
Yeah. So she's not only hunting, but she's also willing to protect her babies. Greg sees this, and his heart that he was trying to keep manage of just starts to go crazy as
of course
what he's seeing starts to set in. And then he realizes that this bear is probably going to walk right past him, and it's going to follow that noise, which is Matt using this call. And in his head, he's like, I can't let it go to Matt. I need to scare this bear away first. So
and Matt is his brother, right?
Correct.
Okay. I asked that because I was going to, I'm sorry. I asked that because I was like, okay, so what do you do if that, because I'm thinking, okay, friend or brother? If it's your friend, do you let it go?
It's such a hard call, and I don't think there's a right answer because it's like you have to protect yourself too, right? It's similar to like, you know, how people feel guilty in situations where they were like, oh, I realized after the fact that I walked right past the murderer and I could have stopped it if I would have just like kept walking with that girl. Or like, oh, I heard a scream and I didn't respond and I could have saved it. And it's like, or you could also be dead. Like,
that's true.
There's no right answer in my mind.
But then is it mean to say you would do something different if it was your brother as opposed to your friend?
I don't think so. Relationships between like humans are very complicated, and sometimes people are closer with their friends than they are their own family. Or like they feel, my fiance, he has such a strong drive to his family. Human relationships are complex, and how you respond to situations where you realize, oh shit, someone could get hurt here, and how do you respond is much more telling about you as a person than it is about the relationship or that person themselves. But no matter, Greg is recognizing this bear is hunting for something, and what it's potentially hunting for is this noise that Matt is making. And so all of this is kind of happening at the same time, is that he's seeing the bear, this is dawning on him. And so as he stood up to pull his bowstring back, and as he's recognizing like, oh, this is not a moose, this is a bear, he crouches down, he puts his bow down, and he grabs his gun, which was over his shoulder. And so as he kind of like scurries around the tree that he was sitting next to, he pulls his gun up to his shoulder, lifts it up, and looks through the scope, and he realizes that the scope is zoomed in as far as it can go, and his hands are shaking so bad that he can't adjust it to zoom out to be able to get an idea of where the bear actually is. So he at this point lowers the butt of the gun to his hip, and he looks at the bear and he's like, whoa, bear, to try to get it to say like, hey, you're not alone here. And this bear responds with ferocity.
Of course, it's a mother.
Yes. So the way that he describes it is that she immediately swivels her head and locks eyes on him. She drops down onto all fours. Her head lowers. Her lips curl back from her teeth,
Mm-mm.
and the muscle that he said just like built up over her shoulders told him immediately, like, she's going to charge me.
This is where I say bleh and poop my pants and
Yes,
see my whole life flash before my eyes.
same.
Like, no.
Same. So he's got the butt of the gun against his hip. He's got the barrel of the gun still pointing towards the bear, and he sees this bear just charge towards him, and the dirt and the leaves and the debris are flying up before
Oh my God.
or behind her. He says that he believes that she's just charging, and it's a bluff charge. She's going to stop, but she doesn't stop, and she doesn't stop, and she doesn't stop. And finally,
Shoot warning shots. What are you doing?
yeah. So finally, as the bear gets closer, he pulls the trigger, and he believes that he might have hit her in the face, but based on the fact that she just keeps going like nothing happened, he isn't so sure. The barrel of Greg's gun is still pointing out away from him as the bear makes contact. This throws him off balance, and as he falls backwards, the bear is moving so fast that she slides right over top of him,
Wow.
but with agility that, again and again, people are shocked by how agile bears are. She just whips around and lands with her front paws on Greg's shoulder. His face is right there, and she just leans down and bites.
Ah.
Many grizzly bear attacks last for 2 minutes or less, and based on the information collected from experts, it is believed that Greg was attacked for close to those 2 minutes. As the bear bites down again and again, it punctures a hole through Greg's left cheek, and its canine tooth actually goes all the way down and punctures through his jaw.
Oh my God.
The next bite leaves a gaping hole in his neck, and the bite after that renders enough damage to his head that blood is pouring from the wounds and into his eyes, and he is unable to see. As the attack continues, he finds that he can hear screaming, and it takes him a moment to realize that the screams are coming from him. Once he realizes that he is the one screaming, he also recognizes that the bear seems to be becoming more aggressive, and so he tries to hold in those noises. Somehow he is able to roll over, and when he does, he tucks his chin in as close to his neck as he can get on the left side, recognizing that the injury to his neck is going to cause problems. The bear, though, is still right there and starts to bite on his head, and the back of his head is scalped. The pain that he feels is similar to how you would think a red hot fire poker being like stabbed into your head would feel. And he says that the decaying smell that was coming off of the bear was so bad that it was making him nauseous. And at this point, he realizes that he needs to fight back or the bear is going to kill him. He recognizes that the bear still might kill him, but he knows that he can't just lay there. So he's still on his stomach, and he starts to use his fists to punch behind him to hit the snout of the bear. And the bear is like, what are you going to do with that? And she ends up grabbing his arm, lifts him up, and just shakes him like a rag doll.
Oh my God.
When she tosses him away, he lands, and he is shifting at this point, so that way he's sitting, and he's still blind. He can't see. And so he's trying to use his hearing to detect where the bear is, so that way he can kick out with his feet. And I kind of get this image in my head where he's like sitting there, his feet are flexed, his knees are bent, and he's just bloodied and torn up, and like he can't see, and so he's like frantically just turning around as he's sitting on his butt. Greg ends up getting bit again, and this time when he does, he goes down on his belly. He interlaces his fingers on the back of his neck, which is exactly what you're supposed to do. So that way you're protecting the back of your neck, and you're giving a little bit of cushion. If the bear does bite, it has to go through your hands, and it's not just going directly into your neck, which sounds as terrible as I'm sure it is. Or maybe it doesn't sound so bad unless you're in it. So he plants his elbows on the ground and then spreads his legs wide, so that way the bear isn't able to roll you over quite as easy. And this is exactly what the bear tries to do. She's clawing at his sides and his legs, and then she ends up biting down on his upper back, like in the ribs flat area. And she again picks him up, shakes him like a rag doll, and tosses him down.
All of this is happening in under 2 minutes.
Yes. She then grabs a hold of his leg, and I want you to imagine for a moment that this isn't like a person dragging another. She picks him up by his leg and like lifts her head up into the air and starts to walk away. And
no.
so she's dragging him away, and all of a sudden he hears, "Hey, bear." And he's like, where is this noise coming from? Is this me talking again? And there's this ringing in his ears, and he can't see, and his legs are feeling like he can't move them, and his arms are feeling like he can't move them. And he hears again, "Hey, bear." Then he feels himself kind of be yanked in the direction of where the hey bear was coming from, and he's dropped to the ground, and for a moment, peace washes over him. From Matt's point of view, he knew something was wrong when he could hear something, but he wasn't really sure what he was hearing. He makes his way towards Greg, and as a reminder, this is very boggy territory, so he's kind of moving slowly at best. So Matt hears all these noises coming from Greg. He's not sure if it's an animal. He doesn't know what's happening. And it isn't until he gets to where Greg was that he realizes there's a bear there. Greg is on the ground. The bear has attacked Greg. When the bear finally notices Matt is when Greg's leg is still in the bear's mouth, and Matt had yelled, "Hey, bear," and the bear turned its head to look at Matt. So Matt at this point is trying to figure out how to get the bear away from Greg, because if he takes a shot with his rifle, he's worried that it's just going to go through the bear and hit Greg. And so he finally decides that since yelling, "Hey, bear," isn't getting its attention, he starts bluff charging the bear, which is a whole nother thing that we could get into, because charging a bear is much scarier than like just saying it. So he charges the bear a few times, and finally the bear lets go of Greg, and as it makes its way towards Matt sends off 2 rounds into the bear, at which point the bear takes off. At this point, Greg's the one with the first aid knowledge. He's the one who knows how to handle wounds and traumatic situations like this. And so in the meantime, like, they're able to still hear things around them. And so they think the bear is still right there. And so they're kind of like talking to each other. Greg ends up getting into a kneeling position, and he's like, "I need you." He's like looking at Matt, but he still can't see. He's looking at Matt, and he's kneeling, and he's like, "I need you to describe to me what you see." And so Matt is describing the wounds to Greg, and Greg is in turn telling him step by step what needs to be taken care of and what they can kind of let go for a little bit. And kind of in between the like descriptions and the care, Greg is having moments of like, "I think I'm dying. Like, I think I'm done. This is where I'm at." And Matt is basically telling him like, "Shut up. We're not talking about that. That's not an option." So Greg, again, disclaimer, I'm going to describe what Matt sees and describes to Greg. And so it's 30 seconds. If you're not willing, skip ahead. So Matt described that he saw a dime-sized hole in his cheek that also pierced through his jaw. The back of his scalp had been sliced away, but not so low to the point where his spine was visible. So it was like just to the base of his head.
Oh my God.
The left cheek had been ripped away at the lip, and he had a cut in his forehead that was about 2 inches in length and very deep. His neck wound was the worst, starting just above his jawline and extending down into his upper neck. The skin and tissue that had been shredded were just hanging off of him. Greg gave Matt directions on how to use their scarves to turn them into compressed pressure bandages. And once everything was bandaged, it was time for Greg to get out of there. They had 1.5 miles to get back to their boat, and Greg still can't see. They don't have cell phone service. They don't have a satellite phone or an emergency locator. They have to get from where they are to their boat.
I'm not trying to talk bad about anybody or blame anybody or anything like that. With that in mind, I still have questions though. What did the $10,000 go towards?
All of the other gear.
No, the most important thing, a satellite phone,
Yeah.
some way to get in touch, if anything. Okay.
Yeah. No. And Greg, like from the interviews that I listened to, Greg is very adamant. Like now he's like, that's the number one thing on a list is when you start prepping for something, you need to have a satellite phone or some way to connect with people if you are out of cell phone range. Number one thing. And so he's very open about the fact that he and Matt made a mistake in leaving something like that behind. Shockingly, as they realize that they need to get to the boat, Greg is actually able to walk out mostly on his own. I don't know how he managed to do that, but it was only a few feet after he had first gotten up that he ends up passing out. When he comes back to, though, he finds that he's able to see again. So
oh, wow.
He's able to get out of the woods. And as they're walking, Greg is in front and Matt is following behind, and he's just got his gun pointed down the trail,
ready,
kind of expecting the bear to come back. So it took them 3 to 3.5 hours to get from the side of the attack back to the boat. Once at their boat, both Matt and Greg are horrified to see that the swells on the lake were around 10 feet, meaning that the ride would be rough and hard on Greg. And due to the very fragile situation that he's already in, they know that he's like on the verge of hypothermia. He's on the verge of shock if he's not already entering shock. And for him to get on the boat, there's no way that he would survive the ride back to get cell phone reception. And like a miracle, someone ends up showing up. Another pair of fishermen go by in their boat, and just then Matt starts screaming and he's waving his arms and he's basically like screaming help. One of the men ends up seeing Matt, turns the boat around, they come back. One of them agrees to go find cell phone reception and call 911. The other one stays there with Greg and Matt. They start a fire, they layers onto Greg to help keep him warm and to help reduce the impacts of shock. And they're also at the same time adding their own compresses to Greg's head and face wounds so that way they can minimize the bleeding. Once emergency services finally get there through a helicopter, they use an IV line to give Greg fluids and pain medication, and it actually took them 6 tries to be able to find a vein because he had lost so much blood. He would end up being airlifted to the nearest hospital where they immediately took him in for surgery. 300 stitches and 6.5 hours later, Greg was not out of the woods, but he quickly got there. It was during his healing process that his life truly began to evolve. And I'm very briefly going to touch on it because his book, which is called Wild Awakening, digs much deeper into his history and his trauma that he felt. And a lot of it seems to start with when he was 8 years old, his parents got divorced, and he was desperately trying to get his father's approval. And he felt like he needed to earn his love because, like many children, when their parents separate, they kind of go through this like, is this because of something that I did? And Greg doesn't realize how much that actually affected him and how it played a role through his entire life until he gets attacked by the bear and he starts to navigate not only the physical healing, but the emotional healing and the spiritual healing. And the attack itself ends up bringing Greg closer to his father. And this opened the doors wide for Greg to begin to see that the separation was never because his father didn't love him or that he had done anything wrong. Relationships, as kind of mentioned earlier, are complicated at best and hard. And sometimes, most of the time, relationships do not work out. But many problems can be resolved or eased with dedicated and undisrupted time. Again, the book goes into much greater detail about not only the attack, but the effects and the evolution that Greg went through in his recovery. And as we wrap up this episode, I am going to quote what Greg says in his book, and it's something that I would like everyone to carry with them as they roll through the rest of their lives. On a business trip a while back, I visited Arlington National Cemetery near Washington, D.C., the final resting place for more than 400,000 of our nation's military heroes. The view is stirring. Endless rows of white crosses and marble headstones align on a sea of green grass. In my time there, I did not locate a single inscription that described the fallen service member as a great pilot, sailor, or soldier, or as someone who fought the toughest battles or built a successful business. No, the engravings on those headstones spoke of relationships. Most concluded with the statement, he was a loving husband, or he was a loving father, or a combination of both. If you died today, how would your headstone read? If you don't like the answer, it's not too late to write a new one. You and your family will be eternally grateful. And that is the brief story of Greg Matthews and his encounter and survival of a very angry grizzly bear.
That was, wow. I'm going to.
Oh, thank you.
That was amazing.
That's for Greg. I'm just saying thanks for him.
Well, I was applauding the story. Yes, thank you for that story. Your storytelling is also superb. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Wow. Yeah. So I know you do cases of bears. Have you ever, I guess, talked about what you're supposed to do with each bear? Because there's like, if it's a grizzly something, I know if it's brown, lay down.
Yeah.
If it's black,
Fight
attack
back.
or something, fight back.
Yeah.
And if it's white, good night.
Yep.
Yeah.
I actually said that in one of my prior bear episodes, just like last week. So the short version of what you do is if it's a black bear, they generally are just trying to get easy food. And so if you put up a fight or if you make yourself real big or you make a lot of noise, they're like, this is confrontation. I don't like it. And they scram, generally speaking. Then with grizzly bears, they have a kind of like their automatic setting is to attack first, ask questions later. And so they will attack to incapacitate you and then move on. And they don't necessarily want to kill you. They don't look at humans as food, again, generally speaking.
Well, this one seemed like she was about to drag him off.
This one was hunting. This one she was hunting, and it shows in not only the very first presentation of her is that she's up on her back legs, sniffing the air. Mm-hmm. There was a distressed moose call signaling that, there was potentially easy prey for her and her two cubs. Mm-hmm. And then in addition to that, the fact that when he realized that he was screaming and she was attacking more viciously as he screamed kind of tells me that that's also like, she's like, oh, this is my food and it's still alive, so I must attack harder.
Yeah.
And so the kind of following up a little bit too, the bear does end up dying from the gunshot wounds that Matt took. And they found the Alaska Fish and Wildlife Service, some name similar to that, found the bear like 100 feet away from where Greg was attacked. And it looked like one half of her jaw was broken in half. And so she didn't actually have full use of her jaw. And they believe that that's actually what saved his life. And it was potentially even the shot that Greg got off on her that broke her jaw.
That's what I was going to ask. Yeah.
And then that also plays into like, okay, so now this bear was looking for food. Now it's also in pain. It feels like it needs to defend its cubs. Like, you get this giant pot of like all the things that could go wrong in a bear attack, and you add them together and stir them up, and you got Greg Matthews. So
yeah, wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad he survived. I would like to. You know what? No, never mind. I wouldn't. My true crime mind is taking over. Never mind.
It's a different circumstance, but
yeah. But I'm happy he survived. I'll probably check out that book. Can you repeat the name of the book?
It's called Wild Awakening. It's by Greg Matthews with James Lund.
Okay.
And so I think I bought the book on Thrift Books, and I've read it multiple times, and now I've got it highlighted and marked and notes in it. And so it's a great story, and he does a great job of also explaining kind of like intermittently with the plans for the hunt and then the attack and then the aftermath, and how life led him up to this point and how he's moving forward with life after. And it's a great book. I highly recommend it to anyone.
Okay. Well, I might check that out. Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me on this episode. I don't want to sound too happy because this was a really sad story. And I was sounding happy at the end. But thank you so much for having me on. That was a really interesting case/story. I'm really happy you had me on this episode, but not too happy because of what happened to Greg. So
you can be happy and sad at the same time. Those are allowed to exist in the same space. Yes, I'm glad that you came on too, and I'm as I've mentioned in previous episodes, the Darkcast Network has been really great for me, and I really enjoyed making connections in the podcast space that are not necessarily related to like the wilderness and kind of stories that happen there. And it's just been a really cool experience, and this is one of those things that came out of it. So thank you for joining me, and I'm sure there will be more opportunities to collaborate in the future.
Definitely. Maybe one day I'll have you on one of my episodes. Maybe I'll do a wildlife true crime case and I'll invite you on.
There's plenty out there.
Oh, I wanted to say, I know before we started recording, you asked me if I knew anything about bears. So I did want to point out on air, what I know about bears is what my husband has told me. And this episode proves that he was right, because my husband is usually right.
Yeah.
Don't tell him I said this. Don't tell him I said this at all.
We'll just disclaimer, like, don't listen to this episode.
But he has told me the one thing, my husband is a big guy. Like, he could be linebacker, football player type guy.
Okay.
And he's like, I'm afraid of bears. He's like, I am not ashamed to say I am afraid of bears. Because he's like, you can't run from them. You can't outrun them. You can't climb. You can't swim. I just found out the other day, bears can climb frickin' mountains.
Yep.
What in the world? So there's no way to get away from them. There's nothing.
The best, I think from what I've seen, the best course of action is to just like, in short, just keep doing what you're doing. If you see a bear somewhere and it's like, okay, if you were talking to your friend, stop moving, but keep talking to your friend, because the bear is already like probably heard you. And if you suddenly stop talking and then they turn a corner and you're right there, they're going to be like, oh, like it's going to like trigger, like, this is suspicious. And again, they attack first, ask questions later. And then also, like, if you're not talking and you see a bear, don't start talking unless the bear like clearly sees you. And it's like, at that point, you got to start saying like, hey bear, I'm not food. I am a foe. You don't want to fight with me. Please go away. And then also like back away. You don't want to like continue approaching the bear. You want to stop where you're at and try to back away and just, give as much space as you can.
I gotta say, you're asking me to remember way too much stuff when a bear is right next to me. That's way too much information. I am probably not going to remember any of it. I'm just going to be like, oh, shh, and that's it.
Well, I hope you never have an encounter with a bear where this has to come into play.
Hopefully not.
The chances of that happening are very small in comparison to the number of bear attack stories. There's actually very few. So you got that on your side.
Well, yay.
What is life without close calls with disaster? Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow the podcast to be the first to hear the now weekly episodes. Join our subscription on Patreon, Apple, or Spotify today and immerse yourself in the haunting beauty of the great outdoors. For around $4 a month, you'll get exclusive access to the first episode of each month and early access to all other episodes, showcasing the morbid and mysterious side of nature. Please reach out with story requests, and if you have your own story, please email tragedywithaview@gmail.com for a chance to have your story featured on a later episode. Again, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.